Hello world, welcome back to the PG.biz podcast with your hosts, myself, the ever wonderful Brian Baglow, and joining me as always, the mesmerising Peggy and Salz. Hello Peggy, how are you today?
I am well, Brian. It's the beginning of a week and it's a dive into a great topic today. So I am raring to go. You have Scottish Games Week right around the corner. How's it going in your world?
It is a lot of fun. I am not running around with my hair on fire screaming. No, that is not what is happening. It's all is calm, all is placid, but we are kind of busy. Yeah, there's a whole lot happening. We've got 5 events happening in 3 cities over the course of a whole week, with industry, with film, with education, with policymakers and politicians, and all the fun of the fair. So if you thought that organising game developers was hard work, try the politicians. I dare you.
I don't know. The concept of herding cats popped into my mind for a moment, but I thought I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't go there.
There's an equivalent Scottish saying, which is, it's like pushing treacle up a hill, to indicate that things may not be as fast as one would wish. So it's a bit like pushing treacle up a hill. But I'm here. We have a fabulous guest. We're recording a podcast. So I have no complaints for the next 45 minutes.
Absolutely not. And far from being slow or difficult, this is going to be a breeze because I love these types of shows when we can talk to someone who is a doer, a maker. We have a guest who has just received the 30 Under 30 award by Performance Marketing World. It recognizes outstanding achievements and contributions to mobile game user acquisition. Our winner, our star, our rock star maybe even, Ryan Davies, Kwalee's head of digital marketing. Ryan, great to have you and great to get the party started with you.
Thank you very much. That was a winning introduction.
It was, wasn't it?
I'm going to keep that one in the bank forevermore.
We are pumped. We are psyched. We have high energy. Casting in on
Yes.
Brian's also high energy as well from what he's doing. So yeah, we are all together. The band is here, Brian.
It's true, and it's very much a supergroup, I think, for the mobile generation. So, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. And I have to ask, what was your reaction on hearing that you are one of the all-time Hall of Fame legendary heroes of old?
No, it's not something that I was too involved in or had much awareness of, so it was definitely a cool surprise to kind of get that information through, and it's definitely an amazing thing. I think, in a way, I was actually pleasantly surprised, partially because having seen the content that Performance Marketing World had put out over the years, and also actually that Under 30 list over the years, it actually surprisingly to me hadn't had so many mobile marketers maybe, or maybe gaming marketers, which, considering it's such a huge area of performance marketing in our industry generally, kind of always a bit of a surprise. So, it's good to kind of fly the flag for mobile, for gaming definitely as well, because, there's so many amazing people that work in our very specific industry. So yeah, it's neat to kind of represent that in a way.
Thank you for agreeing to be on our small podcast after your massive win. So we totally appreciate it.
Well, it didn't feel like a big deal to me too much until you've just gone into that heaps of praise.
So I want to stay with the award for a moment because you got it for outstanding results in UA and revenue growth. Some interesting numbers are not just the fact that it's 30 under 30, right? You had 6 years at Kwalee, and the other numbers that stood out, a portfolio of over 45 games at Kwalee, and we'll get to it in a moment as well. A massive over 1 billion installs. So I have to ask myself and ask you, of course, Ryan, what talent or skill have you drawn on to execute on so many campaigns so successfully?
I think definitely when you're relatively junior, as I had been at the start of working at Kwalee, there's maybe the most valuable skill in a way you can have is an element of diligence. I think, there's so many elements of being an effective UA manager, performance marketing team member, but I think that just a willingness to keep an eye on activity, to understand your day-to-day activity, to see what's happening in order for you to have a better sense of initiative around the data and the activity you're seeing. So I think like a willingness to really jump into our activity to understand what was happening all the time. That's something that I leaned on a lot during my earlier experiences in the company, just that eagerness and that diligence to kind of pay attention to the data, to see what was happening with all our activity and all our campaigns. That I think got me through that initial period, let's say, of learning and development. Opened me up, I guess, to more skills that I would then pick up on and learn as I went. So yeah, that was definitely a big part. And I think maybe there's a little element as well of when you are a bit more junior, you have almost like a accidental ability to take a bit more risk, right? Like you haven't seen loads of things fail and loads of things succeed, so you're basically willing to just take those opportunities, take those chances, which I think with Hypercasual at that time, so this was maybe 2018, 2019, really when the genre started to flourish. That was a useful skill to, and fair to say, Kwalee as a company is risk friendly, right? So the whole company merged well then with some of my more junior antics and experience to be able to take some risks.
And I want to pick up on Peggy's point because, Quali does say, we've had over 1 billion downloads, and the studio, while it may have started in hyper casual, now is extending out into hybrid casual. It's quite a broad range. So how do you kind of accommodate those different approaches to development, to user acquisition? How do you maintain focus with an increasingly broad and diverse portfolio?
From probably the initial part of the equation is always to identify, let's say, the commonalities and the differences, right? So, those genres obviously have plenty of commonalities. There's things that we can learn from all of our hyper casual experience and bring those into the hybrid and casual worlds, whether it's the way we're handling data, information, how we're making predictions about what we're doing. There's things that we can pull from all of our experiences there. But at the same time, you have to then take stock of, okay, what is going to be different within this environment in talking to other people and learning and testing some games. What information are we missing? What do we need to pick up on and develop? I think identifying those processes and then trying to learn on those. I don't know, to maybe give an example would be Hypercasual is super famous for, a key part of the process is how are we discovering games? We're using marketability tests to kind of find low CPIs. That's the kind of classic hyper-casual method. That's very different within a casual or maybe even hybrid casual space. That maybe that's slightly less important, or certainly the process for finding marketable games or effective games would be very different. So, okay, that's a new area where we need to develop some new skills, develop some new ideas, potentially bring in some new people to fuel those ideas.
Where do you see the future of hybrid, and casual, going? Do you think it's converging? Are we seeing more of a divergence?
It's a messy thing, right?
Yeah. I'm really interested to get your take.
Yeah. I mean, just naming it, that's like step one, is figure out what we actually mean when we're thinking of these kind of games and what we believe behind them. But I think in a way that then determines a bit of what we think is the future for these genres. And I think the truth is that basically they are conglomerating to some extent, right? So, it's indisputable right now that hyper casual as it existed 2 years ago, 3 years ago is definitely not the same. But I think, rumors of its demise have been greatly exaggerated. Basically there's definitely this appeal right now to say that hypercasual is dead, but I think in reality it's just going through that same evolution. Now I think we're hitting this phase where the games are more elaborate, and that's the key element of what's being added into the like potion, I guess. So now when people talk hybrid, a lot of the time they're talking about essentially slightly more dramatically more evolved hyper casual games, right? So I think understanding that is important. You look at something like Arch Hero is what everyone always says is like the classic archetypal hybrid game. But I look at that game now and I play that and I think this is just as, if not much more complex than what most people would regard as like a casual title, right? Like a Candy Crush. So I think our definitions have become pretty hazy, and I think the key now is just making longer tail games that are more effective for a broad user base. That's definitely our big focus.
Let's just stay with the idea that it's just evolving. We won't say is hyper casual there or not there. It's just moving. Everything's moving. Everything always moves in games. But complexity, that also means a challenge for your UA as well, because you can't go for the quick wins. You have to have a different approach. How have you matched sort of the innovation in the games with the innovation in your marketing to find those players, to keep those players?
Maybe a couple examples would be that through Hypercasual over the years, you wouldn't, maybe the type of campaigns you would be running would be best, wouldn't be so heavily based around tracking events or running event-based campaigns. So like identifying key events within your games that are basically going to attract the right kind of users. Like we would dabble with this in Hypercasual, but in reality, optimizing towards return on ad spend, ad revenue, and things like that would generally be working better. Working now in a space with, say, more in our purchase revenue potentially, we have to look at running campaigns that are basically looking less for direct revenue within a game and more towards, what does a good user look like? What kind of events are they tracking? Are they logging? What are they doing in the game? So that's an example, right, of then, okay, now we need to start figuring out what events really work in our games. What are we trying to track? What are we trying to find? And so, in a way, this is quite simple, quite basic user acquisition. It's things that people in the casual and mid-core and hardcore spaces have been doing for a long time. But us as a company, we need to evolve in that direction. It's just we know we have a comfort level with being able to run ad revenue campaigns, but now, okay, we need to evolve this slightly different wing and slightly different arm. But I think it's safe to say we had some confidence doing that because we know we're good at running UA for ad-driven games. So we had some confidence being able to direct ourselves in this slightly different direction.
One quick follow-up. You said, it's about finding those players. That's always also changing. I've asked this number of times to different marketers over the years. You said you want to net an engaged user, an engaged player. What does that look like?
Truth is, I think most successful either hybrid or other games out there really are bringing in a variety of different user types, right? And the key is to be running campaigns that work for those separate segmented user types. So I think probably a strength in a game is to be able to, probably the best games are ones where you can run and appeal to a large variety of different audiences, really, rather than hammering massively into one very specific niche. But I think if you're going to have a success with hybrid in particular, where you're maybe trying to keep UA costs, like a CPIs, maybe let's say, or things in that regard, those costs like down a bit. I think trying to keep a slightly broader audience and find these different audiences is quite important.
Kwalee comes from a mobile background. It's like your entire portfolio was at one point mobile. And while we've talked about expanding out into other genres, you're also, of course, expanding out into different platforms. So you're now looking at browser gaming through a partnership with Crazy Games. So how is that changing the studio, and what demands is that making on you with regard to UA and your approach?
Browser games is definitely an interesting one for us. And as you said, we're partnering with Crazy Games on. We actually have a PC console division as well. So that's another significant area of growth for us at the moment. To your question of like, how does that kind of jive with a UA or performance marketing approach maybe? And the answer to that really is like not as easily as with direct mobile, right? So it was a really fascinating world to try and learn and pick up and understand a bit more because, truth is, mobile is very well set up and organized for a performance marketer, right? Like like iOS 14 and everything like that to the side. It's really been set up and placed now, and it's well built for people like me to kind of really get our teeth stuck in and work very effectively. When it comes to, let's say, browser games or PC console especially, that setup and that environment is not as conducive to a performance marketer. There's a lot less tracking, there's a lot less information. So it's much more difficult to be running effective campaigns and to prove that you're running effective campaigns. It starts to verge much more towards the, more traditional brand marketing or like, probabilistic marketing, basically. So that has been an interesting element. Like my UA team does handle some elements of what we do with PC and console. But again, it's much more about kind of getting your name out there, getting the brand, getting the visuals of the games out there than it is about driving pure engaged performance in the way that we would for a mobile game. So it has been really interesting to kind of understand some of these limitations, but the fun now is, trying to figure out, okay, yeah, I guess there is a bit of fun there, right? It's like
Yeah. Oh
compared to
yeah.
the mobile where it's kind of laid out to us on a platter. It's like, okay, you've got to be a bit more hacky. You've got to try and figure some different ways to get the game out there and make some noise about it, basically. So yeah, so those are interesting. It's like not UA in a traditional sense of how I have learned, but it's fun.
I love the fact that traditional UA extends all the way back to 2017, or possibly even earlier. But
Yeah, old school.
oh yeah, but so to kind of flip that on its head, Ryan, are you finding any commonalities? Are you finding any ways to bring that learning back into mobile, or do you have a sort of a point where both sides are feeding into some new ideas?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe one very direct example is that we do actually use our mobile games to advertise our PC console. So, like, we do run ads for our PCC games within our mobile games. And because I think maybe there's a bit of a perception that those audiences are wildly different, but that's definitely not true. I mean, you can't really think like that in 2023. I think to see these like segmented mobile and PC console audiences is just not true. Like, there's plenty of overlap, and I think there is room to take advantage of it. So yeah, there's some room for overlap there, but I think really the technology behind whether it's browser-based gaming or PC and console, Steam and the other platforms, yeah, there's some tech work to be done there on their part to get that in line with the mobile space, really.
So really it's about understanding that players are on the platforms they choose, basically. And as you said yourself, there are these opportunities on different platforms, different surfaces all the time. What have you explored, or have you explored, for example, you talked about Steam. So is there a variation on the Steam store? Or maybe outside of the app on smart surfaces with Nostra, for example? I'm hearing a lot more about that. What are some ways that you are reaching these audiences across all the platforms, all the surfaces?
Definitely, most of our work so far is centered around the ones we've discussed. So definitely Steam being a good example, like PlayStation and Xbox, Nintendo Switch. But then also the browser-based ones we talked about. We've tried plenty of app stores in China, like I think like so many people have, to varying degrees of success. It's always a hot topic and definitely a key thing to talk about where others are maybe distributing their games and what platforms are available and what's happening. And so when we've got such a variety of games, and such a huge back catalogue of games as well that we very actively sustain, we do have to kind of keep quite well focused on those iOS and Android platforms where we are making all of our money. So yeah, these other platforms are important to us, and definitely within PC console.
So, Ryan, you're not working on this alone. You lead a team of more than 50 people, I believe, and you're handling hundreds of thousands of dollars, pounds in daily spend. So my spidey sense is tingling here and telling me that uh, with great power comes great responsibility, a lot of challenges, potentially some nightmares, and I'm imagining some teachable moments and life lessons. So can you share any stories from the front line with us in terms of the user acquisition day to day, good or bad?
It's worth clarifying that basically my role basically oversees what we consider like performance marketing and digital marketing, which includes our growth, so UA team, creative, as well as like product marketing, ad monetization, which all kind of, these things all kind of fit together. My biggest lesson, I suppose, that I've faced is really something obvious, but finding very good people to lean on is like such a critical and important part of day to day. Like I like to give an example of this is that like because I started at Kwalee 6.5 years ago or so, and was the one individual person running marketing, I definitely leaned towards and had a tendency to like over focus on doing things myself. It's a classic like young manager problem, right? That you kind of try to take on too much responsibility for yourself. Maybe don't put enough on the people within your team, even if you trust them. And so finding those good people that you do trust and really starting to lean on them and feeling like it's comfortable and okay to lean on them has become something that I really had to pick up and learn and adapt to. I think that has helped dramatically. Just my team was growing gradually over the last 6 years, and you don't really stop and take stock of the fact that you are now in charge of, 50 people, that there's 50 plus people in your team. And I didn't really until recently take stock of the fact that, okay, I am like a leader within this organization. I'm a leader for these individual people.
So I have to ask, Ryan, to go back to one of your earlier points, how has that impacted on that somewhat gung-ho attitude to risk that you maybe had earlier on in your career?
That's a really good question. I think basically I still have it, but I have a better sounding board for evaluating whether that risk-taking desire is sensible or not, right? So I think just through accidental training and working in Hypercasual, I definitely still have that like let's go for it kind of desire or mentality that I think is not hugely common in the mobile industry, partially because we do usually have so much information and data and we want to run tests and we want to understand things in a very clear way, which don't get me wrong, I do fundamentally want to do that, but I think sometimes that's a little at odds with a desire to press on and learn quickly and understand things rapidly. But now I kind of, I'm in a position where luckily I can have that thought process, but speak to people more openly, not have to rely on myself and my own thoughts so much, and just instead have those discussions and have those people that will give me a very realistic and logical discussion process. So that helps.
Long live the sanity check.
Exactly.
I'm going to ask about the sort of the fundamental balancing act when it comes to UA, which is balancing your data-driven methodologies with creative and creative thinking. And it's a reality that you and pretty much everyone working in UA deals with, is that you have to make investments without definitive data. So how did you get your head around that? And how have you approached it so successfully with Kwalee?
Yeah, so part of that I think is, and this all kind of ties together with the willingness to take risk element, right? Is I think it's trained a bit from being heavily involved in hypercasual, is that you do learn very quickly. And I mean that from essentially two different like directions. Well, for one thing, when you're running hypercasual games, you get data back very quickly. You learn very quickly about what's happening with the games, right? Like on day zero and day one, you're already starting to see if you're making your money back in an effective way. And so historically for us as a company, we've been able to react and really rely on the data and not having to make too many snap decisions because we can look at how things are reacting quickly. So that's been good. But then also that process means you learn quickly as individuals too. You pick up skills very quickly because you're launching games all the time. You're failing lots because that's kind of what a lot of hyper casual is. And then you're picking up skills. And so I think that is going to help us well into this like new world that we're kind of working in with hybrid and hyper. I think we want to understand things and learn things very quickly about our games. Now, will we be able to do that to the degree we have with hypercasual? Absolutely not. There's no way. Like we can't, when we're looking at much longer lifetime player periods, we can't be looking at day one and making all of our decisions about that, right? Like that's just not going to be feasible and possible anymore. So, when we talked earlier about developing new ways of doing things and trying to understand what's the differences, that's another key aspect, right? We need to be looking way beyond day 30 that we might have prioritized for hyper casual. So basically to answer your question, we haven't had to take so many risks because we've had such immediate data. But now we're coming into a world where we do need to be taking a bit more risks.
So do you have any lessons, any kind of takeaways for anyone listening who is not as comfortable with working on hunches or, instinct from your own background?
one thing I would say maybe that does answer that is that it can be really easy to ignore or not fully grasp very clear positive signals. If you see some data or some information that's clear positive, you know, like there's an instinctive reaction to be like, yes, okay, this is the right direction. But I think sometimes people do that and do it then with a degree of hesitancy. Almost it's like, I almost don't believe how good this is, or that this is definitely the right direction, you know? But I think there's some value, and again, it's kind of trained a bit from hypercasual, is that if you do see something good, like you really, really, really should put as much as you can behind like chasing that good direction, because usually you've done the work to know and understand when a good thing looks good. And like you can definitely question yourself endlessly of like, okay, should I have followed that signal? Should I have gone down that direction? You know, was that great day one retention number really the most important thing I should have been thinking about as an example? But I think there's so much to be learned and gained from going down that path and from like pushing on that like good sign that it's just worth it.
I was looking around at what Kwalee has been doing other than, over 1 billion installs and all the great milestones. And I saw something, and it was interesting for me because it's not just a program. It has an incentive, because usually you throw something out there and say, oh yeah, we're going to do this and everyone's going to do it. And then no one does it. But you have a different approach at Kwalee. Artificial intelligence is what it's called, Kwalee Artificial Intelligence, which is about, hey, anyone who has great ideas about how they can work with AI or enhance AI or bring it to innovation, I imagine also in UA as well, share those ideas, innovate, and even get incentives for it. So I'm wondering, have you already come up with an idea? What do you think of that program?
So actually just democratizing that to some extent and just opening up to the whole company in different aspects and different areas to basically say, like, what have you been thinking about? What weird ideas have you come up with that we could implement this? Certainly within my creative team, it's probably like the most obvious and easy place to be using various tools like Midjourney to really build out our assets or understand how we could like enhance certain elements of our marketing materials or marketing tools and make those look more interesting with slightly more minimal work. One of our casual games actually that we're building out at the moment basically uses like our AI tools to flesh out and develop some of the characters and scenes and elements within the games. So certainly on the art side, it's something that we've leaned into. But yeah, like there were quite a few weird, interesting ideas that kind of came up in the course of it. But yeah, it's a neat idea, and definitely I think helps fuel how we could be using it. But I think, like everyone with AI at the moment, finding exactly the right tools for the right time, and it is not always super easy.
But before we wrap up, Ryan, we've got a couple of questions that we asked to all of our guests. So the first one is, what game are you playing right now?
So I've been playing like a lot at the moment of Chrome Valley Customs by Space Ape. I do think they've really, I feel a bit like, I think I read about them basically going for like the male market within like a match 3 context. And I do feel, it makes me feel like a bit of a cliche that they have totally gripped me in through like a car based game with match 3. And
There's nothing wrong with being part of a demographic. So we're going to open it out now, because the other question that we ask all of our guests is favourite game of all time.
Basically, The Witcher 3 is my favourite game of all time, but Tens, which is a Kwalee game, is probably my favourite mobile game of all time, and that is not one of our most well-named known games, and it was kind of pre-Hypercasual, but it's definitely like our smartest game.
Actually, I wasn't aware of Tens. I was
Yeah,
just going to say,
It's amazing.
Take a look at that one, Brian, if it's that
I think
addictive.
we both will. Yeah.
Proper good puzzle.
Okay, sold. So there you go, Ryan. That's another 2 downloads. So that's 10 billion and 2. So you can take that back. If anyone asks you to justify the podcast, job done. We really appreciate having you on the podcast. And as I say, please do come back or send the Ryan 007 chatbot, whichever works for you.
Definitely will. Thanks for having me.
I have to do a +1 here. Great to have you on the show. And also thanks for sharing the real view into what it is to build a leadership style and to lead a team of 50 plus. It is quite a task.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.